Welcome to the 10th video in this tutorial series on building an e-commerce website using React, Redux, GraphQL, and Firebase. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how we can restrict access to certain pages so that only users with admin rights can access them. We're also going to build this admin toolbar so that whenever an admin is signed into the application, they'll see this toolbar which has a link to their admin. Before we get started with this tutorial, I just want to encourage you guys to check out my official YouTube channel. Before we begin this video tutorial, I just want to encourage you guys to check out my official YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/simpletut. Not only to view my other videos and content, but we also have an official playlist for this video series. I'm adding each video from this series to this playlist, so it's just a great place for you to find previous and future videos. I also want to remind you guys that there is an official GitHub repository for this project, so you can actually come here and look at the code that I'm writing, and again, there'll be a direct link in the description of this video. And finally, I just want to let you guys know that you can visit my official website, which is simpletut.com. Join our community, look at our other tutorials and open source projects, and again, show your support. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Let's get started. We already have the ability to restrict access to pages and content within our application. This means that users have to be signed in order to access those pages. In this tutorial, we want to extend that logic to allow for additional user levels. This means that depending on the user that signed into the application and the rights associated with their account will be used to determine the content that they will have access to. This is my users collection within my Firebase database. And as you can see, I'm looking at this particular user's document within the collection. And on this document, we can see the data that we're currently storing about our users. So that includes the date that they signed up to our website, their full name, and their email address. Now, in this tutorial, we're going to have to add a new field, and this will be added programmatically. But first, I want to manually add that to this user's document because they are already signed up to our application. So this field is going to be called user roles, and we're going to use this. It's going to be an array, but we're going to use this to assign users their roles. So any user that signs up to the application will automatically be assigned the user role, but we're also going to add this particular user an additional role, which is going to be the admin role. And we're going to use this user roles array to determine if a user has the correct access rights to view content and pages within our website. Now, before I can actually implement this programmatically within our application, the first thing I need to do is make sure to remind you guys how authentication works within our Firebase app. I'm going to remind you guys that we have two tabs which are relevant to our authentication within our website here, and that is our authentication tab and the database tab itself. So again, authentication, currently we have two types of authentication enabled within our application currently, and that includes the email and password provider and our Google provider. That means that we allow users to sign up or sign into our application with their email and password, or we allow them to sign in or sign up to our application through their existing Google account. Now, what happens whenever a user is authenticated within our Firebase app is Firebase will automatically store their information and generate a unique user ID, which is their UUID here. Now, although we store users' information within our users collection, regardless of how they signed in or up to our website, this is actually completely separate to Firebase authentication. And we're actually manually doing this after a user has already been authenticated within our application. To actually implement this programmatically, as I said, I need to come back over to my text editor, and I need to go into a file that we created in one of the earlier videos in this series, which is in our Firebase folder and the utility file that we created here. Now, what this file contains is basically a bunch of helper functions that we're using throughout the website. We're also exporting a few things from our Firebase library, so for example, auth or Firestore. But the thing that we need to look at here is this handle user profile utility function. Now, we call this after a user has been authenticated within our website, right? So whenever this is called, we're passing in a user auth object. And this is what we get back from Firebase whenever a user signs into our application. All right, so this user auth object contains the user's ID, right, which is a UUID. And what we do is we check our users collection here, and we find to determine if the user exists within our database. Because what we're trying to find out here is if the user is just returning and is signing into the application, or if they're a new user and they don't currently exist within our users collection within our Firebase database. And then what we do is if they do not exist, we know we need to store their information and register them in our database. So what we do is we then create a new request to actually add that user and their data to our Firebase database. Now currently, we are destructuring from the user auth object the display name and email, and we're generating dynamically the current date, the current timestamp. And then we're sending that information with any additional data that might have been passed through to this function. And we're sending that to Firebase and via Firestore, and we are actually storing that data in our users collection. Now, this is where I'm going to add our user roles array, because this is going to be a static array. It's never going to change, and it should only ever assign a particular the user role to normal users that sign up using this flow. So it's pretty safe for us to just create a const here called user roles, which is going to equal an array with a user role assigned to it. And then all I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass this user roles array into the object that we're sending Firebase whenever we sign up a new user to store them in our database, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back over to my browser, click on register, and I'm going to register a new account. So I'm just going to call this one. So this guy is going to be called Jack Black, and we're going to say Jack Black at gmail.com, enter a password, and we're going to register. And I'm going to be signed up to the application and signed in at the same time, but I'm going to come now over to Firebase. And as you can see in real time, a new document's been created. Their information is here as we entered it with a timestamp, but we also have this user roles array, which has the user role assigned to it. Okay, so before we go any further, let's just remind ourselves how we're currently restricting access to pages. So to do that, let's head over to app.js. This is where we define our routes. And currently we are restricting access to this dashboard route. And to do that, we're using this with auth higher order component. And what this does is it's a very simple higher order component. A higher order component is just a component that makes a change and then returns that component. So what we're doing in this case is we're actually calling this custom React hook called useAuth, and we're grabbing inside of this hook, we're grabbing the current user that's signed in to the application. And if they're not signed in, this is actually null by default. But we're grabbing that from the Redux store, and then depending on if it exists or not, we're either redirecting the user to log in, or we're returning the current user, which is then used to render the page component, the page that we were restricting access to. So what we need to do to restrict access to pages based on admin only access is actually very similar to what we're doing here. but we actually need to create a new page that we want to restrict access to for admins only. So within my pages folder, I'm going to create another folder called admin, and this is just going to contain an index.js file and a style sheet. So we'll say styles.scss. And within the index.js file, I'm just going to import React. So I'll say import React from React. And we also want to import the style sheet. So I'll say import styles.scss. And then we want to create our component. So we'll just say admin equals, it's going to take props. And we'll just return for now. I just want to return a div and a h1, which just says my admin. And then we need to export that from the file. So we'll say export default admin. Okay, so we actually need to be able to access this page. So we need to create the route. We can do that in app.js. The first thing we need to do here is just import the component. So we'll say import admin from, it will be pages admin. And then I'm just going to duplicate one of these routes. I'm going to duplicate the recovery route. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename the path to admin. And I'm going to replace the component we want to render with the admin component we just created and imported in the file above. So now that we have that, we can head back over to the web browser. And because we don't have a link to this page anywhere in the application, I'm just going to manually enter that into the browser. So /admin, and I can obviously see and access the page. Currently, we're not restricting access to this page in any way. So that's the first thing that we're going to work on. We need to create an additional higher order component that works very similar to with auth. So what we're going to do is within my hoc folder, which stands for higher order component, I'm going to create another higher order component called with admin auth.js. And for now, all we're going to do is create a const called with admin auth, and that's just going to take props. It's going to be a function, and for now, we're just going to immediately return the children passed to it. We're going to do that. We're going to have to do a bit more in this file shortly, but for now, I'm just going to export this by default. So with admin auth. So now within app.js, I'm going to be able to import that higher order component. So we're going to say with admin auth from the higher order component folder with admin auth. And then I can take that and the same way I used with auth, I'm going to wrap my admin route with my higher order component. So notice here that I'm passing in these nested children, these nested components to my higher order component, and for now we're immediately rendering them. So if I come back over to the browser and I'm on my admin route and I can refresh this a few times, everything is working exactly as it did before. We're still rendering it, but we are now using this higher order component. Now currently this higher order component is not making any changes to the component. We're not doing any kind of checks or anything like that. We're just immediately returning the children. So what we want to do here is we want to create a custom React hook. What we need to do is we need to evaluate the current user. We need to get the current user from a Redux store. We need to evaluate both that they're not only signed into the application, but we need to also check that they have the admin rights assigned to their account. And then based on that, we will either redirect them away or we will allow them to access the page. So to do that, we need a custom React hook in a similar way that we created our useAuth React hook. We need to do something very similar here for our admin auth. So I'm going to create a new hook. So I'll just create a new file. within my custom hooks folder called useadminauth.js. And within this file, we need to import a few things we just need to import a few things. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import from React, and I'm going to import the use effect hook. I then need to import something from React Redux. So we'll say import from React Redux, and we need to import use selector. And to redirect the user, we're also going to import from React router DOM the use history hook. And then what we'll do is we'll create the hook itself. So we'll say const use admin auth, which is going to take props. And what we want to do is, first of all, we want to call the use effect hook, which is going to take a function, and we're going to pass it our current user as a dependency. So to do that, we need to actually get that from our Redux store. So what we'll do is we'll say const map state. We'll create our map state function. So what we'll do is it will take the state, but we'll destructure the user state from that. And then we want to get the current user, which will be on user.currentUser. And then to get that from the Redux store, we'll simply say const use selector and pass it our map state function, and that will give us the current user. And then all we need to do is evaluate that current user object. So we'll wrap that in a condition, but what I actually want to do here is I want to create a utility function that will take the current user and determine if the user is an admin. So what I'm going to do is within my source folder, I'm going to create a new folder called utils. And in my utils folder, I'm going to create index.js. All we need to do is create a new function. We're going to export it. So we'll say export const check user is admin. It's going to take the current user. And then we need to add some fallbacks here. So the first thing I'll do is I'll check that the current user has been passed. And then we need to also check that it is a valid the current user object has the user roles array. So we'll say array.isArray current user.user roles, and if that returns and evaluates to false, we are simply going to immediately return false, right? So that means that the user would then not have the rights to access that page or that content. However, what we will then do is we're going to grab the user's roles. So we're just going to say const, and we'll destructure from the current user the user roles array, right? And then all we need to do is check to see if the user has been assigned the admin rights. So to do that, we're simply going to say if the user roles array includes admin. And in that case, we're going to return true. Otherwise, we're going to return false. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can come back over to our custom useAdminAuth hook. And what we need to do is import that utility function. So we're going to import that from our utility file. So I need to come out of that folder into utils, and then we're simply going to import check user is admin. And if this evaluates to false, right? And remember, we need to pass the current user here. And if that evaluates to false, we're going to use our use history hook here. So we'll say const history. So we'll say const history equals use history and equals use history, and we'll call that as a function, and we'll simply call history dot push, and we'll push the user to log in. And we need to make sure that we pass the current user. We need to make sure that we pass the current user as a dependency. Otherwise, we're simply going to return the current user, which will then evaluate to true. So we'll simply say export default use admin auth. Now, although we can import it directly from this file, what I want to do within my custom hooks is I have this index.js file, which means I can just import all of my custom hooks from one place. So to do that, I import all of them here. So I'm going to import use admin auth from use admin auth, and then I simply export it from this file. And then what that allows me to do within my higher order component is when I go to import that custom hook, so I'll import that from custom hooks, I can just import it directly. So I can say use admin auth rather than having to go / use admin auth or use auth. I can just import it directly from custom hooks. And then all I need to do here is just pass this in. So I'll say use admin auth. I'm going to pass props. And depending on whether this evaluates to true or false, we will either redirect the user or we will render the children. Okay, so now all we need to do is head over to our web browser to test this out. So head over to my web browser and let's try to access our admin route. And as you can see, I'm redirected away to log in. But there is one last thing that we need to do, right? So we need a way of actually we need a way of allowing a user to easily access the admin route. They shouldn't have to manually enter the admin route in the browser, right? There should be a link. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a toolbar that has a link to the admin page on it, and maybe in the future we can add some additional links there too. So that is just going to go at the very top of the browser, and only admins when they're signed in are going to actually see this toolbar. So what we'll do is we need to come back over to our application, and what we'll do is we'll create a new component. So we'll create a folder, we'll call it admin toolbar, and it's just going to contain index.js and a style sheet, so styles.scss. And all we're going to do here is we're going to import React from React, and then we'll create we need to also import our style sheet, so I'll say import styles.scss, and then all we need to do is create our component. So we'll say const admin toolbar, which will take props, and what we're going to do is we're going to return something. For now, I'm going to create a div, give it a class name, something like admin toolbar. And that's going to contain an unordered list with a list item. We only need one. And then for now, we can just export that as well. So we'll say export default admin toolbar. And I need to basically create a link here. So I'm going to import something from React Router DOM, which is going to be the link component. So here I can say link. The text is just going to be my admin, and we're going to direct the user whenever they click this to the admin route. So it's pretty simple at this point. Let's actually add this to our page. for now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over to app.js because I want this to be visible regardless of what route they're on. I want it to be separate from the layout or the design of the page. It literally has to be just a bar that literally sits at the top of the page. So at the very top of this file, I'm just going to have a new section which imports components, and I'm going to import the admin toolbar from that component I just created. So I'll say it's going to come from components and admin toolbar. And then just above my switch component here, I'm going to render out my admin toolbar. So now if I come back over to the browser, you're going to see that I have this link. Okay, so there's two things that we need to do here. We need to, number one, we need to style it. And number two, we need to conditionally render this component. This should only appear if the user is signed in and they have admin rights. So first of all, let's just style this. So let's come back over to my admin component, my admin toolbar component. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to target the admin toolbar class that I created. I want it to be display inline block. We'll set a width of 100%. We want the background color to be black. We'll set the height to auto. Set the margin to 0 auto, and we want some padding on either side to match the margins of the website. So we'll say padding 0 top and bottom, and 10 pixels on the left and right. Then we'll just target the unordered list and the list items. We'll set the list style type to none, but we'll also reset the margin and padding both to 0. Then we're going to set the unordered list here. We're going to float to it right. We want to set the list items to be display inline block. And we're going to target the individual links. We want those to be, display block, but we want the font size to be something like 1.6 rem, which is 16 pixels. We want the line height to be 1. We'll set the color here to white, but we'll add padding of 10 pixels all around. I'm also going to add a transition here, something like all 0.4 seconds ease in out. But I'm also going to target the hover state because what I want to do is change the color, the background color. I'm going to say RGBA to a white, but we'll set an opacity to something like 0.6. And I'll change the color here of the text to black. And also I want to take the same transition for the hover state. Cool. So let's head back over to the browser and just look at what that's done. So as you can see now, we have this admin toolbar here. It looks pretty nice. We have a nice hover effect that the user can click, and it would take them to their admin page if they were signed in as an admin. So currently I'm not signed in as an admin, so I can't access that page. So if the user is not an admin or they're not signed in to the application, they should not be able to access this route, and they should also not see this toolbar. So to do that, what we need to do is head back over to our text editor, come back over to our admin toolbar component, and the first thing we need to do is we need to get the current user from our Redux store. So we need to create our map state function, which is basically just going to take the state from the Redux store. We'll destructure from that the user state. And then what we'll do is we'll return the current user from user.currentUser. And what we need to do here is we also need to import something from React Redux. which is going to be use selector, which is a Redux hook. And we're going to use that. What we're going to do is we'll say const, and we'll call use selector and pass it map state, our map state function. And that will give us back the current user. And all we need to do here is just determine if the user is an admin or not. So we'll say is admin. And all we'll do is we need to use the utility function here called check user is admin, which we created earlier. We're going to import this into our admin toolbar. So I'll import that here. So we'll say import from our utils file. And it's called check user is admin. We just want to call that and pass it the current user object. And then we'll just have an if statement here, which will say if the user is not an admin, return null. So what that means is that if the user is not an admin, the whole component is not going to render. So I'm just going to reload this a couple of times, and as you can see, that works just fine. Okay, so let's now sign into, so if I actually look at my users collection, I have two users, right? So I have Jack Black, who is a normal user, and I have Joe Blogs, who is an admin. So what I'll do is I'll sign into both of those accounts, and I'll see if I can, what I see and what I can access. So first of all, let's log into our admin account. So that's Joe Blogs at outlook.com. I'll enter the password, click on login, and I'll be logged into the application. I can also now see this admin toolbar, which has a link to the admin. I can click on that and I can access the admin route. So I can also then log out of the application and the toolbar will be removed. Let's now sign into a normal user account. So that's Jack Black at gmail.com. I'll enter the password. Let's sign in. And as you can see, I'm signed into the application, but I'm not able to see the admin toolbar, and I'm also not able to access the admin route. Now, before we finish this tutorial, I just want to make one small code refactor. So currently we have two types of higher order components. One is called with auth, and this is used to restrict access to normal pages. And another which is called with admin auth. We just created this, and it's used to restrict access to pages with to users who have admin rights. Now, if we look at how we handled our with auth, which is a higher order component we created in a previous tutorial, in order to redirect the user within our use auth hook here, and I can look at that if I go into custom hooks, use auth, what we did was we used with router from React Router DOM to pass the history into this custom hook so that we could push the user to the login route. We don't need to use that. So what I'm going to do is a small refactor. Instead of exporting this with router, I'm just going to go ahead and export with auth. We don't need to import React Router DOM here either. And I'm going to come back over to use auth because we still need to push the user to the login route in this case. But to do that, I'm going to import something from React Router DOM, which is the use history hook. I'm then going to be able to create an instance of, I'm then going to be able to access history. So I'll say history, use history like that. And then we can simply remove props as we have access to history directly within our custom React hook. And that brings us to the end of this video tutorial. This was the 10th video in this series on building an e-commerce website. But before I end it, I just want to remind you guys that there is an official GitHub repository for this project, which you can find in a direct link to in the description of this video. I also want to ask you guys to subscribe, like, and comment on these videos. And of course, don't forget there is an official playlist for this series, which is just a really easy way for you to find previous videos, but also find the next video that I will be posting for this series. Once again, thank you for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.